Hey guys, my name is Matteo Salvati, and I wanted to give you guys my recommendations and some of the measures that I would take if tasked with dealing with this. So, getting right into it, I want to talk about the biggest problem in this case first and foremost. Um, the biggest problem that you see through this case, through this example, is disorganization. Sure, you can kind of link it back to human error, right? You had that employee that forgot to restrict access at the meeting. But if there's a level of organization of labeling these files, they wouldn't get out into the wrong hands in the first place. So with that in mind, I think the first measure that I would take would be a better system for labeling files and sending out files. And once you implement that sort of labeling system, you won't encounter these issues. So that's number one. The second thing I wanted to get into was this concept of the principle of least privilege. And I think it's just an incredibly important and relevant conversation to have when dealing with data breaches such as this. So first of all, what it is it basically establishes this idea that only people that need certain access should have that level of information. So I guess an example would be maybe you have somebody working in finance. You wouldn't have personal, you wouldn't have just personal employee information that they would have access to. That would be a different department. And in sort of separating this by division, you're not going to have an overabundance of data, and kind of as you see it here, where data is falling into the wrong hands. So with that in mind, I think that another countermeasure that you could take would be encrypting the data. That would kind of allow for only certain people to have access, those who have the key to have access to that data, which would put them in alignment with this principle of least privilege. And going hand in hand with that, I think you need a system of two-factor authentication here. Two-factor authentication is incredibly important. Number one, for review, but number two, we've talked a little bit about organization. This kind of allows for only certain people to have access. And again, it would kind of be another preventative from it falling into the wrong hands in the first place, right? Another thing that I talked about in my article was there being an automated system for restricting access, right? We talked about it a little bit where the employee forgot to restrict access in the meeting. Maybe make an automated process where it's either time-based or like situation-based, where you can only open it a certain amount of times. And that would prevent them from having to go back and then go back and restrict the access. So that would kind of take away the human error element, which is important in this case. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I had, but I think these tools and these measurements would prevent something like this from happening, because, and going back to my original point about disorganization, it would allow for a process that, number one, makes sense, and number two, is subject to go back and be updated, and it will just give you a general plan and a foundation for dealing with issues, whereas it seemed like before they didn't really have something like this. So yeah, this is just a general outline, but I think this would absolutely help them in the future and be something that they should follow time in and time out. So thank you guys.